Hello and welcome to the Delores Fenwick Nature Center. I'm Katie.
And I'm August.
And just behind us you can see the Delores Fenwick Nature Center. We are Pearland's nature education facility. So inside our awesome facility, we have several native animals including alligators, turtles, and freshwater fish. We also offer a variety of programs from ages 2 all the way up to 99 inside our facility and outside our facility as well.
So here outside the facility, we have almost 2 miles of walking trails that surround 2 ponds where you can see our bird rookeries. We have a large nesting site for native and migratory birds that are here all year round. Different types and species are here. We also have an educational pond off to the side where you can see some of our species up close and personal. You can see some of those native plants and native species that are a little bit harder to see in some of your big scale pond and wetland systems.
So now that you mentioned the educational pond, we're actually going to take a field trip there today. So we'll be taking a dip into water quality and looking at the water quality of our educational pond versus our man-made non-native ponds that surround the nature center. So let's go.
For our field trip today, we're going to be doing a dip netting and water quality testing activity. We have 2 ponds here at the Delores Fenwick Nature Center. We have our small educational pond that we use specifically for field trips. We also have our large ponds off the back of the Nature Center. Today we're going to be comparing the different life and water quality that you have in these 2 different ponds, one which is made with native plants and animals and one that's just kind of man-made and simple. Now this type of field trip and experiment is really great because it doesn't matter what type of water you have in your neighborhood or your city, it can all be done the same. So small ponds, big ponds, lakes, rivers, streams, all of them have the same capacity for life and they have the same capacity to do these experiments in. So we're going to get started with our dip netting here today. Katie, are you prepared with your dip net?
I don't have my net.
That's all right. I've got one for you.
Oh, thanks.
And here we go. In order to get started with your dip netting, the most important thing you have to have is a dip net. Now it doesn't have to be a fancy dip net. It can be something you can get at your local fishing store, even your local pet store. Now this is one of our larger dip nets. You can see that it is a large mouth and the mesh is also pretty large as well. So this is going to be good for your larger fish, some big insects, and some vegetation. And your smaller nets, you can also use like a fish style net. Those are going to be good for reaching into vegetation or looking for smaller fish and insects that might be more difficult or might swim through the mesh in the larger nets. Now, don't be afraid to dip into the vegetation. Lots of different animals call vegetation home and use that to find their food and use it for shelter as well. So you want to dip net in the open. You also want to dip net in your vegetation. As you get ready to do your dip netting, you're going to make sure that you keep your net, once it's in the water, going smoothly through the water as you move back and forth to catch things. If you stop your net, things will swim out. So you want to have a constant, gentle sweeping motion until you're ready to collect. And once you think you've got stuff in your net, you're going to raise it gently up to the surface and pull it in so that you can look through.
So August has completed a dip net trial, so we're going to sort through his net to try to see what's inside. So before we go to search through the net, we want to make sure our hands are nice and wet. So if you want to look right here, we've got some living and non-living material in here. We've got a mosquito fish. I'm going to plop him in there. We've got a lot of, let's see, freshwater ram's horn snails. A lot of them. A tadpole snail.
And you really want to go through all the vegetation because you can find lots of different insect larvae that live in the vegetation.
We've got quite a few of these snails in this pond. Oh, if we look right here, the top of the net, we actually have a spider. I don't think this guy's going to be an aquatic spider, so we're not going to drop him in the bucket, but we'll just let him hang out on the net as well.
As you do your survey, there's 2 different types you can do. You can look for diversity, which would mean you want a bunch of different types of animals, or you can look for density. So maybe you want to collect every single snail because you want to find out how many snails you have in your area. So we're usually look for diversity, which means we like to see lots of different species because that tells us that our pond is a very healthy environment that can host lots of different species within it. as you can see, we have now moved from our educational pond down to our large pond. Now, not all ponds you're going to be able to enter in like we did our educational pond, and that's where these longer dip nets really come into play. With this, we can really reach down into the ground, into the pond to try to find stuff.
So as part of our experiment today, we're actually filling out a data sheet and looking for different points to verify our water quality. One of those is checking out our air quality. So we're looking at the air temperature, the wind speed, the wind direction, and our weather conditions. Overall, it's cloudy with wind facing north at 67 degrees at 7 miles per hour, okay? With our water quality, we're gonna be looking at the temperature of the water, what's the surface of the water doing, and the actual color of the water. So if we're looking at our educational pond here behind me, you guys can see August getting our water temperature. So let's find out what the temperature. What's the temp, August?
Just about 72 degrees.
72 degrees. Good to know. Okay, and we'll get the temperature of our educational pond versus our large ponds behind us as well, okay? If we look at the surface of the water, we do have a waterfall, and it is giving quite a bit of current, but as you guys can see, the water is relatively smooth with some small ripples. So I've got smooth ripples as our water speed and what the surface of the water is doing. And as far as color goes, I can see to the bottom everywhere in the pond, save for a little bit of spots of algae. So actually our water is clear here. And that is more than likely due to the amount of vegetation that we have here at our native planted pond. So to test for water turbidity, we're gonna be using a Secchi disc. And what this does is it kind of tests for the water quality, or clarity, excuse me. So we're gonna dip this into the water and see how many feet we can go down to actually see the disc. Let's see. On our string, we've gone ahead and taken the liberty to mark every inch. And this will help with your students as well. That way you don't have to have a measuring tape, you just count the inches and do a little bit of math. So if we look down at our Secchi disc, it's down at the bottom of the pond, and I can still very clearly see the Secchi disc down at the bottom. So I would say our water clarity is very good. So I'm gonna reach down, grab it right at the surface, the water, and let's see how many inches we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 inches of clarity. So almost 2 feet, which is about how deep our pond is at its deepest point. So let's do all of this over at our large, non-native man-made ponds.
So we know that our educational pond is only about 2 feet deep. So we've marked our string here with 2 feet, and we're just gonna dip it into our larger pond at that 2 foot depth and see what we can see as far as the Secchi disc goes for our turbidity. If we can't see it at 2 feet, we'll slowly raise it up until we can see it, mark that point off, and then we'll count our inches again. So here we go. All right, if we can see down here, can no longer see our disc. So we're gonna start to reel this back up until we can see it again. And just starting to see the white. Right about here. So we can tell based on where we could see and not see our Secchi disc, the turbidity is much, much higher here in the pond with no vegetation than it is at our educational pond. So let's count this off. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just about 5 or 6 inches of water visibility in our non-vegetated pond.
So here at the Delores Fenwick Nature Center's educational pond, we have planted it with vegetation that is native to wetland habitats. So here in front of me, I have several different species of plant. Right here, we have an emergent plant, which is one that comes up out of the water. This is an iris. Down here in the water, floating along the top of the water, we have a yellow water lily. We have this in several locations of the pond. And over here to my far left, we have longleaf pondweed. All of these plants that we have planted serve a different purpose within the wetland habitat. Some of the ones that are like emergent, their roots go down into the bottom of the pond and their leaves eventually grow up and above. With their roots and with their root systems going down into the dirt, it helps to hold the silt and all of the pond bottom in place. With some of the other plants that we have around the pond, they serve a different purpose.
Two of our other emergent plants that we have here in the educational pond are Pickerel Weed, which is right here in front of me. It's the short, you can see it's got the really nice little purple flowers. And then the taller plant behind it, which looks similar, is Powdery Alligator Flag. So now that we have gone through our process of dip netting and collecting samples from outside, we've brought our samples back into the classroom so that we can go through our observations a little bit more thorough. So we have our two tanks. I have got the open large pond tank here. I know when we did our water observations, our environmental observations, we asked what color it is. This is a really good way to see what color that water is and see the clarity and the turbidity of it. And Katie, you have the which tank?
I have the water from the educational pond. So looking at the clarity and the turbidity of the water, I see huge differences already just by at a glance.
Yeah, so we are going to take some samples of this water and go through water quality testing for things like pH, nitrogen, phosphates, and dissolved oxygen. And we're going to go through and we're going to identify the different species that we caught.
So the first test we're doing, which we're shaking back our little vials back and forth, is testing for dissolved oxygen. So dissolved oxygen is basically the amount of oxygen that's going to be available for the variety of wildlife that's in the water that we're testing.
If you have too much oxygen, that can be detrimental to certain species. If you have too little oxygen, it can be the same. When you see things like fish kills happen, a lot of times the oxygen content in the water has dropped so low that it can't support the life of the fish in it. Sometimes that's because of chemicals, which we will continue to test for, like nitrogen and phosphorus. And sometimes it's things like too much algae that blocks the surface action of the water from getting more oxygen put back in it. So our second test, we are testing for nitrates. Now, nitrates are a natural chemical that we find in the environment that helps plants and animals with protein growth that they need in order to grow. Now, if you have too much nitrates though, it increases the growth too quickly, and that can decrease the oxygen content in the water, therefore causing issues for animals and plants that need that oxygen in order to grow healthily.
So for our experiment today, we're doing more of a chemical test, but if you have younger students or you're in a bit of a time crunch, you can also do a litmus test for testing for nitrates, pH within your water quality. A litmus test, you can get them at any pet store in the aquarium department, and all you have to do is just simply dip your litmus test into your water. Okay, hold it there for a few seconds and actually follow the instructions on the litmus test. Pull it out and let it dry, and each pattern will line up with a code on the testing kit that it comes with, and you can actually see the testing results develop over time. And each section has a different amount of time, so please follow those instructions that come with your testing kit.
So we have the results from our dissolved oxygen test here. In my right hand, I have the sample from the educational pond, and in my left hand, I have the sample from our large pond. Now we're gonna take these two and we're gonna compare them with our chart to see what our levels of dissolved oxygen in the water are. So if we put these down on our clear background, you can see an obvious difference between the different colors. Now, our educational pond looks like it's probably somewhere between 2 to 4 ppm, and ppm means parts per million. So that is 4 oxygen parts per million. Now, our large pond here might be a little bit distorted because the turbidity was very high and we didn't have great water clarity. But it's not completely clear, it's not completely pink, so we probably have somewhere around 2 parts per million of dissolved oxygen in our large water pond. So we're going to record these results and move on to our next sample.
So our results are in for our nitrate test. So let's look at our key to figure out what we've got. In my left hand, I have the water quality from the large non-planted ponds, and in my right hand, I have the educational ponds, which are planted. So let's take a look. So if we line these up right here, okay, you can kind of see on the white parts of the paper that our water in these tubes is pretty much clear. So let's look at our large non-planted ponds first. This one, it's almost at 5 parts per million. It's almost exactly the same for nitrates. Then if we look at our educational pond, it's actually a little bit lighter than our 5 parts per million. So this is somewhere between 1 to 4 parts per million of nitrate. So remember, those nitrates were needed for plants to grow, but if there were too many, it can cause too much protein to be in the water and actually affect those plants. So, excellent.
So now we've got the results from our pH test back in. You can see pretty obviously these are very different colors. Now pH is testing for the difference between the acidity and the basicness of, of your water. If you have too much acid, things can't live, and if it's too basic, things can't live either. So we're going to test these, to put these down here on our color chart and see what level of pH we've got. So we've got here our pH list. I'm actually going to switch these. So this is our large pond. This is our educational pond. I'm going to switch them so we can line them up with their correlating numbers here. Now, if we look at our large pond first, you'll see that it's pretty dark, meaning that it is a higher number, probably somewhere here between 9 and 10, which means it is very, very basic. All right, so it's not acidic, it is a basic. If we look at our educational pond, we're down here on the bottom, somewhere between the 7 and 8 range, which is 7 is neutral, which means it is almost the perfect pH. So we're going to work on identifying the different species we caught between our 2 different pond systems. On the back of our environmental observation sheet, we've got a set area to discuss and list out the flora, or the plant life that we found. Some of those we identified earlier we were in the pond. And then our fauna, which is the animals. So as we identify these species, we're going to be writing them down so that we can keep track of not only what we found, but we can also put down the numbers of what we found. So Katie's going to get started with the samples from our educational pond.
And while I'm going about identifying, August will take care of writing because my hands will be all wet. Okay, yes. So if we look inside our collection that we have, I'm going to take my smaller net and start to pull out some species. So right up here up top, first animal we want to talk about, this is a ram's horn snail. It's a freshwater mollusk. Okay. And these guys are going to be going around eating a lot of algae inside the pond, and they are also food for a variety of species. I'm trying to see where all of our fish are hanging out. We do have quite a few fish in here.
Over in this back corner.
Got it. Okay, so and just like before when we were outside netting, you want to make sure your hands are wet as well when we go to view. So in here we've got a couple of smaller mosquito fish. So if I open up the net just a little bit, you can see one guy right here, another one right here as well.
Mosquito fish get their name because they will eat mosquito larvae. Mosquito lay their eggs on the surface of the water, and as they hatch before they fly away, they'll kind of make some different vibrations on the water surface, and these small minnows will come up to the surface and snatch those mosquito larvae and eat them. So we really, really like to have mosquito fish around.
Now we have one more, and this one is actually a bug larva. Whoa! He went back in the water. Let's catch him again. He's an excellent little swimmer. Now, I'm not sure which species this one is.
So this is actually a Dragonfly Nymph. Now, nymph is just a term for a juvenile state. Very similar to butterflies, dragonflies go through metamorphosis. So an adult dragonfly will lay its eggs in the pond, and the nymph will go through different stages of growth. We had a smaller nymph in there as well, and as it grows, the body will elongate more and more, and on its final molting, where it kind of sheds its skin and grows, it will climb up onto a stalk, and it will have wings and an elongated body, and it will fly off to continue life as a dragonfly. So we're here with the samples from our large pond. We're gonna scoop through here and see what we can get. Now, at a glance, you can already see the difference in vegetation level, how there's very, very little vegetation in the water, and you can see the water quality. So I'm gonna be scooping blindly here and going through my net to see what we can get. I'm gonna make sure that my fingertips and hands are wet before we go. So the first thing that we've got here, I'm gonna have to kind of hold it a little bit in my hand, after I scoop him up again, is a glass shrimp, or sometimes people call them a grass shrimp. The term can be interchangeable. And that is a little bitty freshwater shrimp. They can also be found in brackish, but this is about as big as they get, and they live up in the grass and vegetations or along any kind of structure. So you can see they're see-through. When these guys are pregnant, you can see bright green eggs all along the bottom. It's very neat. And if I change and hold him by his tail, which he's gonna flip, the flipping is a defense mechanism actually that gets them away from any kind of predator that's going to try to eat them. On the front end, let's see if I can get it with this one instead. They have what you call a rostrum, and it is, he's upside down, a little point at the top of their head that I compare to, imagine if you bit into a sandwich and you forgot to take the toothpick out. So when an animal like a fish tries to eat him, it'll poke him in the mouth and hopefully they'll let go. So you can also see his eyes and his antenna up here. We're gonna put him back in the water, see what else we can find. I can see there's lots of little shrimp flitting about. Looking for some of our fish in here. So we do have another fish here. This looks to be a juvenile silver side. If we've got a bigger one, we'll kind of show them off. You can see they've got this bright silver stripe that goes all the way from the nose to the tail. And these are a freshwater and brackish water species as well. So put him back in the water. Get another scoop here. Got some more silver sides and the glass shrimp in this one. Floating about, I believe we've got a mosquito fish in here as well, so you can see the difference here in the silver side and the mosquito fish. And if I remember correctly from our larger dip netting, those are the only 3 species that we found. So this is a great example of density versus diversity. So I may have more things in this tank because I have a lot of shrimp, but I only have 3 different species. So it's kind of the difference in accuracy versus precision. You know, we have a lot of different animals, individuals in this tank, but very little diversity, only 3 species. Versus in this tank, which wasn't a hugely accurate representation of that tank too, but we have vegetation, 2 or 3 different species of vegetation, 2 different species of snails, an insect species, and at least 1 fish species that we know in there. So we can see a lot of different diversity within our educational pond versus our large pond here.
So now that we've finished all of our water quality testing, we've concluded our field trip portion. From doing all of our testing, we've seen today that planting in a man-made habitat can help improve the water quality of your habitat.
So we saw in both of our ponds that they had some similarities and some differences. There's not necessarily one way that's bad or one way that's good, but you can definitely tell a difference when you have that native vegetation, you have thick vegetation versus a more sparse and barren kind of aquatic system. We can see that difference in the species that we caught, and we can see that difference in the physical, chemical, water quality testing that we did.
So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you had fun on our virtual field trip and hope that you get to come visit the Delores Fenwick Nature Center sometime in the future.
Yep, we enjoyed educating you guys today, and we hope to see you all soon.
Take care, I'm Katie.
And I'm August.
Bye.
Bye.